Live straight away. Beautiful. All right. Well, Tom, thanks for joining me for a different sort of chat today. I wanted
Thank you
to,
for having me.
yeah, you're welcome. I wanted to introduce you to everybody. For those that don't know, Tom Russell is one of the owners of Hollandspiel, which is he and his wife own it, Mary, and you are probably almost as prolific in your production as SBI was back in the day. What's 55 titles in 3 years? That's got to be a land speed record for ramping up as a small business.
Hmm.
So I'm pretty excited for you guys that how well things seem to be going for you, and everyone is enjoying your titles. So hopefully, with all that experience and background and such a broad range of titles, you'll help me get to the nub of what I'm trying to understand about how games affect our mood and feelings today, in some way, shape, or form, anyway.
Yeah.
So I thought we'd chat a little bit about maybe we could start with Westphalia, and then we can talk about some other games as well. Some that are in your stable and some that are not. But I was playing Westphalia, and all the folks around the table all were very congenial at the start, and we had a fine time the whole way. But the game's built around that. There's kind of a diplomacy style backstabbing theme that gets into that game, and then there's also you've got to be collaborative with the guys that are kind of in your faction as well. And so I'm curious about whether that was intentional from the design perspective, or whether that just came out as you were making the game.
So that was kind of the essential thing I was trying to capture with it, was the kind of relationships between the participants and the tensions that existed, both with kind of what you would call external rivals, and also with the people who are supposedly your allies as well.
Right.
And I think it kind of comes down to wanting to. Sorry, the cat's playing with a piece of paper.
No worries.
No, she can have it. Don't take it away from her. She's having fun. So I think that it was about trying to capture those dynamics, right, and the ways those factions interact with each other, and how everyone has their own kind of agenda, and those agendas aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. A lot of times when you have games, especially multiplayer games, on war or political topics, there's one winner, right?
Mm-hmm.
And really, the 30 Years' War, which is what Westphalia is about, the end of that. I mean, you could definitely say that the Holy Roman Emperor kind of lost the war, but I'm not sure everyone actually really won the war. Everyone kind of got what they kind of wanted and stuff they didn't want. And so I was trying to recreate that and recreate that tension where, it doesn't really matter if you win or not, as long as I win. Right? So that was kind of central to it, to those relationships and that interaction. And that's why it's a 6-player only game, which is a very nutty thing to release. We weren't sure how it was going to do. There was a good chance that it. Mary says she was sure, but there was a good chance that it would have been a folly and no one would have bought it. But it actually was very successful. So.
Well, and it's also and you talked about the dynamics there. The Dutch player is kind of a foil between the two sides as well, and I saw that person ally with myself in the early part of the game because it was beneficial to him, but also give enough to the French and keep the French happy enough that they didn't get too pissed off. Although there was a level of tension almost from the get-go when things started not going the French players' way. And then you had these what I call the bit players on my team that were sort of not really getting to do very much, and no one really wanted to work with them unless it was going to hurt someone else. So it was it was negotiation, but it was also there was persuasion, and then there was threats as well, which typical for that type of game. But folks, at one point, folks started to take things personally as well, and it became a why would you do that? You remember the guy playing Settler's guitar where he's smashing the table and throwing the board around, and he's going like, well, I can win if you just do this. Well, it wasn't quite like that, but you could see that the tension just built, and that this game's only going to last a certain amount of time. So it was really interesting experience.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think it's a lot of it. People get invested in a thing. Like there's a common trope about the game diplomacy that it ends friendships.
Right.
And I think as people get really intensely involved with it, and then when something does, betray them, when there is betrayal involved. It's like twisting the knife, and I think it also depends on how much the players are putting themselves into it. I've seen games of Westphalia where people get really into kind of what I call the role-playing aspect of it. They're like, my Imperial Majesty, and I'm going to help my fellow Catholics against these heretics, and do they repent, and so forth. And then there are people who just look at it almost as a mathematical puzzle or exercise, and they don't have that same investment. And it's a very different feel depending on who is at your table and how much they're putting themselves into it. And I think a lot of times when we talk about emotions in games, I think a lot of it is what we bring to it ourselves. Because really the game itself, it's a framework, it's a structure. It's not itself a game. The players are what make it a game. The screenwriter Paul Schrader, he's also a film director, but he's most famous as a screenwriter. He's a Taxi Driver in that. He said that once that screenplay is not a movie, it's an invitation to others to make a movie. And in the same way, the game is not itself an experience, it's an invitation for others to make it an experience.
Right. Because I think there's many, as you just said, there's many different ways you can approach that game. And when I sat down with it, I was very curious about it and knew that this would probably be my only chance to get a game of it in, because I don't have a wide circle that's going to want to jump in, and you got to have 6, right? So here in Austin, and we probably could have scrounged 6 together, but then 3 out of the 6 wouldn't have read the rules, and so you get this diminished experience. But jumping into it, when I was told what the mechanism of the game was and how things kind of worked, I was like, okay, well, first thing I got to do is I just got to dump debt. I got to get rid of as much debt as I can very first round. And because we all didn't really know what we were doing, there's only 2 guys who played before, I managed to dump, probably half my debt in the first round, and all off to the Dutch player in exchange for some pretty naughty things. And so that colored my view, and I saw everything through the prism of debt reduction, because that's what my victory conditions were tied to. And there's some prestige and things like that. But as long as that prestige was enough to allow me to make some choices and sort of do some thwarting, then you could turn around and try and help your other cooperative players, which then built some goodwill with them. So it was it just really was a blast to sort of have that experience of it's a financial sort of transaction thing going on, and then it's a It's what can I do? What can I do to lever up the side overall? And everyone got kind of attached to it. It was pretty interesting stuff.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's cool. So have you? So here's another. It's sort of well off the war game track, but Secret Hitler. Have you played Secret Hitler?
I have not.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, there's a game that's also now that's a more of a subterfuge game where it's a bluffing game. Basically, no one knows. It's like someone's the werewolf, right? And instead, someone's Hitler or a Nazi or whatever the case may be, and you try and get rid of everybody else. That's another game that gets that gets very emotional, much more so than Westphalia. Westphalia is a more refined kind of table setting and a little more involved, but that was a game that struck me as a feeling generator as well. But there was another type of sets of like mood or the interaction and attachment to the physical counters and the kind of the bits you're moving around. I was reading an article the other day about how wargamers are just shuttling counters around and they don't really care about the men and don't appreciate the gore and the violence and the horror of war. And that kind of struck me because sometimes some games will really evoke a whoa, I can't push these guys into this conflict any further because it's just a massacre, right? It's probably why I don't play World War I games. I can't abide the stupidity of the leadership in the early parts of the war that just caused so much death for so little reason or gain or result. But I was playing TCS, the Tactical Combat System, in one of those Pacific titles, and those Japanese banzai charges, and the Marines are trying to fight back, and I stopped. And that doesn't happen a lot with a game, and that's a super complex, fairly detailed system. And it really struck me that game managed to bring out something that you don't usually get with the Russian campaign or whatever it might be. So I was curious if you played games that were similar to that, that had evoked that sort of surprising affect of your gameplay.
Sometimes. I mean, the thing about war games in general is, we're engaging with history, and we probably know a little bit about the history while we're engaging with it, right? So, I always have an awareness of what it is that is being simulated, and that these are real human beings with real human suffering. Now, there's a misconception about war games and war gamers. I'm sure you probably heard from non-war gamers before, which is the idea that war gamers are celebrating war and glorying in it, and that we're getting a sick thrill out of the violence, and that's never been the case. I've never sat across from someone or talked with someone for whom that was the case. It's always there's always kind of a soberness to it. Now, people playing the games aren't always sober when they do, but there is still a seriousness to it, and that includes reflection on, I flipped this counter over to its reduced side. Well, that's representing people dying, people being injured, or people not, being combat effective, as it were. Right. There's kind of an abstraction there, and sometimes it's difficult for those games to get past that abstraction, and sometimes it does zero us in on it. There's something that Stanley Kubrick said. I read this because he was working on a film about Napoleon for a long time. He never made it. But he was working on it during the 70s. It was going to star young Jack Nicholson, which would have been terrific. But he said that the Napoleonic battles, from afar, there's kind of a beauty to it. It's two eagles circling around each other and flying at each other. But then when you zoom in close, what the two eagles are doing are tearing a dove apart.
Yes.
And so I think it's important that games find ways to center that without dwelling on the horror to the point where you don't want to play it,
Right.
and without trying to get some kind of prurient interest out of it. It's difficult, and it's something that I always try to be aware of in my work, that these are real things that we're playing with here.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is having what Cole Worley once called the privilege of distance. He said playing war games is a privilege of distance, in that we're far enough removed away from it, temporally and physically, that we can make a game of it and explore it through the context of this simulation of this model. Where some stuff might be too close to home. We're working right now, Mary and I, with Brad Smith. He did NATO Air Commander for us,
Mm-hmm.
and he's doing a game on Vietnam combat search and rescue operations. And these scenarios are based on real operations that are, I guess, are fairly famous. But we're being very careful. What is that popping up there? We're being very careful not to use, the real names of people who were really rescued or who really died, because that's too close.
Right.
That's far too
Right.
close. And so it's important, I think, to approach it with some sensitivity and some knowledge, as far as being respectful of the fact that these are real human lives that we're telling stories about, that we're exploring. And yeah, sometimes that there's a shock there, when you're playing and you have to stop playing, like you were saying, and I think that's something that's kind of inherent in the form, right? But that's okay.
Right.
We're human beings, and that should be the way it is, that we can have that reaction to it, right?
Yeah, it shouldn't just be a callous disregard. It's interesting. I was just, it just kind of threw me a little bit, because you play a lot. I played lots of different games, and when you're playing opposed, there's that, haha, gotcha. Oh, look, I destroyed those guys, right? And you're playing to win, or playing to have fun, or whatever the metaphor, the goal is. But then when I was playing these games alone, you're sitting there going, hang on a second, this is Omaha Beach, and that's the 1st Infantry Division, the big red one, and it's gone. And these little units just disappear off the board, and all these little chits go underneath that show the rate of decline. And it was really visceral for me. And fast forward, 5-6 months or whatever, and I'm playing another game at a different scale, and there I didn't have that same response to the game. And I kept this is what kind of prompted the conversation, is that I was playing Battle for Normandy from GMT, and had previously played Omaha from the Tactical Combat series from MMP, and it was like chalk and cheese in terms of the emotional impact the two games had on me. Because with the slightly larger scale one, it's let's just push another guy in there and see if we can't bash our way through that wall of bad guys. It's so just I don't know that Dean Essig went about trying to create that sense of reality, or that Danny Holt didn't try and create that sense of reality, but that comes out in the games, and it's really interesting to me. It's something that has been sort of bouncing around in the back of my empty head for a while, about how we can make games more visceral and interesting, while still keeping it a game, without morbid and miserable and depressed about each game.
Yeah, I think that's a key thing you're hitting on there, is that the scale does matter,
right?
Because if that counter represents 8 guys, it's a squad,
right?
Or if that counter represents 8,000 guys, there's different levels of investment in that counter. You know, as human beings, we tend to personalize things. You know, when there's a war movie, it's usually about that squad or those guys in that squad. There aren't a whole lot that are about the kind of high level, unless it's about specific commanders and their specific personalities as commanders. And I think the reason for that is we get more invested in the stories of people rather than the stories of formations.
Yes.
You know. And that might be one reason why, you know, I don't usually play super tactical games. Like, I've never played ASL. I've watched it played, and it looks terrifying to me. There are so many counters with so many markers, and I can't even... Mary and I remember a game we play tested once for another publisher. That was a tactical game where you had, I think, a limit of 2 counters in a hex, but one of those counters could be a transport, which could hold 2 counters of its own. And then each counter could have a moved marker and a fired marker and this status marker. And you could have a leader in there. We had this huge stack of count. Like, that's too fiddly for me. But also, I think I would have trouble with, I'm controlling the fate of this handful of cardboard people, right? And having something happen to them. You know, and part of that, and part of also the investment is what happens through the gameplay, what emerges through the gameplay. There's a game that Mary and I play tested once, one of my games, that's Blood in the Fog.
Right.
And which is about the Battle of Inkerman. Yes, Mary had she had a picket, which was, you know, not a full regiment or brigade, just a little delaying unit basically on patrol. And that picket
irked you.
It irked me. It managed to kind of hold off a big part of the Russian army. And to the point where I could go around it, but I just kind of wanted to get rid of this picket, because I'm this big Russian army and this thing's annoying me, and Mary wants her picket to stand its ground, and we kind of created a story about that picket, which was a group of guys, but Mary says it's one guy because it's more fun for Mary that way, and we created a story of heroism and stubborn resistance, and I think that's part of the appeal of war as a topic for people,
right?
Is that it often is always horrible, but it often creates these moments where people can be brave, exceptional, and something in the human brain. It could even be something in the very primitive part of the human brain kind of gloms onto that.
Right. The noble sacrifice and the heroic action, and it generates great narrative, right? It's certainly, even though while some of the things that were going on in the games that I stepped away from, the narrative was fantastic. You could really see what was coming out in the situation, and you're trying to place yourself in that situation and imagine what's going on. So I got that, but I just some titles seem to push that little red button that says whoa. So and when you talk about smaller scale, even down at the squad level, right, that can be I don't know, that sometimes when I'm playing opposed with one of the guys I play a lot with, we'll call a game, right? We'll say, well, okay, we're kind of done here. There's no point continuing the mayhem, right? Because one side's clearly won, and there's no point in seeing it all the way through because you want to be either a completist or a masochist, as the case may be. So that's interesting as well, I guess. Well, now, so tell me, you mentioned this. So I think that's a SOAR group, isn't it? SOAR, that Brad Smith, is that what they call those helicopter rescue groups? Maybe that's what they call them now, and it's probably something different now.
Yeah, I don't remember. See, I'm not super up on the link. I mean, he's the expert on the topic, right?
Is it
And
search operations and rescue or something like that? I
yeah,
think that's all, yeah.
yeah. So
So
he's
tell me a bit more about that, if you're able to.
well, yeah. Well, it's a solitaire game, like his NATO Air Commander was.
Mhm.
He actually had a version of it that we were getting ready to do public testing of, and he said to us, I I think I can do better. So can, can I redesign this? And we said, sure. We want you to be happy with it. We want it to be the vision that you want. And
Right.
so he's been kind of rebuilding it from scratch in some very interesting ways. Could be a very small footprint game. Um, the maps that we're looking at right now are going to be like 8.5 by 11. But there'll be multiple maps for multiple scenarios. And it's just kind of managing these operations for the search and rescue. It's still early in the development process. So I don't have a whole lot of detail on it yet, other than the topic is really novel, and we really enjoy working with Brad. Working on NATO Air Commander with him was an absolute blast, and that's something that we kind of worked with on him for a couple of years before we released the game. So we kind of were more involved in development there. Usually with an outside design, the design is finished, they give it to us, and then we do our testing and development. But this was a case where we were kind of there from the start, and can't always do that because I have games of my own to design and develop. But Brad's someone I consider a friend. I never met him, I never spoken with him, but I consider him a friend. And so it was really nice being able to work with him on that, and I'm looking forward to working with him more on this game.
Well, that's very cool. Yeah, no, he and I could tell that there was the Tom and Mary touch with the NATO Air Commander game because of the hard choices you have to make. That's kind of the hallmark of most of your games that are either designed by you or influenced by you. So Marcus Aurelius and Agricola just annoy the crap out of me, right? They're great. They're great games, but
well, good news on that front. We have a sequel to Marcus Aurelius coming out this year. Same designer, Robert Dulesky, called Stilicho, Last of the Romans.
Yeah.
And then we have another game in the Agricola Charlemagne kind of semi-series, Aurelian Restorer of the World. So we have 2 solo Roman games coming out this year. We just got to space them apart enough where we won't get mixed up.
Right. Yeah, that'll impact.
So it'll be frustrating you all over again.
Yeah, thanks. I don't, so I think I only won Agricola once, and I played it a handful of times, and then Marcus, I only got to play that the one time, but I really enjoyed. I felt that the artwork on the map and the counters there were very thematic. I think you did a great job with particularly the box art was just amazing. Right? Yeah. So, hopefully you'll continue that same sort of thematic infusion in those games. Is really cool. So, well, so with your design, so you mentioned for the Westphalia design that you did look to try and create the various tensions and conflicts between folks. Mm-hmm. Is that a deliberate activity in most of your either A, multiplayer games, or B, even your solitaire games? Are you looking to try and create mood in all of those games?
So I'm not sure if I'm explicitly trying to create mood so much as I look for what tensions and dynamics I think are interesting and compelling, and I hope others will be interested and compelled by them as well. I mean, really, I was having a discussion on Twitter the other day with someone about games and emotions in games. The person was asking, will we ever get a board game that gives you the same emotions as watching a movie where you're, you can be sad by it or be heartwarmed or whatnot. And, I wonder if I don't, there are certain emotions games do very well. They do triumph, they do frustration, bitterness. Those are evoked really well, and dread and tension and fear. I mean, those it does really well. The more subtle emotions, it doesn't. But I think the thing about games, though, is they don't really have to, because games are systems, right? The one thing that games have that no other form of expression does is that it can literalize systemic factors and allow you to observe them. And so I think the really interesting work in games is done in simulation gaming and wargaming, because you are creating models of history, engaging with that history, and then allowing people to observe it. And part of the emotional resonance that comes out of that comes out of people's knowledge of the history and their experience of it in this interactive format. And then part of it comes out of having those tensions and choices, because really game design in and of itself, you're designing these tensions, choices, dynamics, and it's up to the players to make it interesting. Sometimes more than others. I mean, some of my games are a lot more experimental in a way, in that you have a wide variety of game experiences, some which are much more satisfying than others, and it really depends on who is at your table and what they are doing with it, right? So, and sometimes, I mean, once in a while, the game might fall a little flat, but that's the risk you take in trying to do something that's more dynamic and interesting.
Right.
Like my game, This Guilty Land, which does evoke a lot of responses from people.
Yeah.
The way that the deck works mechanically is that at the beginning of the game, you're drawing cards until you have 4 cards for each player. And you might draw more than 4 cards for a player while you're waiting for the other player's 4th card to come up. So you can have a 4-4 split, which is pretty even. It makes it a very tense game. You can have a 6-4 split. Statistically, it's aberrant, but you could have a 17-4 split if that's the way the deck was shuffled. And some of those games can be a lot more exciting than others, and have a lot more tension than others. And people will be more invested in it than at other times. But I think creating that wide variety of experiences makes for a more interesting game, right? So I think I got a little off the path there. Sorry about that. But
No, that's okay.
I think I don't know if I go for a particular mood so much as I go for those tensions, and I hope those tensions are exciting enough to then create some kind of mood or evoke some kind of emotional response in the players who are willing to to bring that to it.
Right. Well, and so even with so speaking of a different type of tension, so with Westphalia and Agricola, and I still want to say Agricola, but maybe that's just my horrible education in Australia, but nevertheless. In Agricola and what was the other one that the little one about the Senate and the people, what was that thing called?
Optimities et Popularis.
Optimities Popularis. Those all generate certain types of tensions in terms of 0-1 type of choices. So I can do this or this. This will help me, but it will also hurt me, and this will hurt you and won't help me. There's those tensions there, but you also manage to manifest that in your sword and shield system. Is that's still what it's called?
Shields and Swords.
Shields and Swords. I'm sorry. It's been Shields and Swords. So that game, medieval warfare, beautiful maps, good counters, and the system is chit pull. Not chit pull. It's chit selection. Right? You choose your commands. Right?
Yeah.
We'll come back to me now. A little slow today. And so but the choices you have to make are on the chit. Right? So do I want to move or fight? Do I want to start a shield wall, or do I want to try and do recovery or retreat or whatever it may be? But you can't do all the things you want to do, and you layer in tensions for each individual player, trying to anticipate what the other guy's going to do, but also having needs that you need to fulfill for the soldiers that you're commanding. So that's another form of tension I think you do very well as well.
Well, thank you. I think that's really kind of the essential trick for this kind of game design. I think is you can't have all the things you want, and everything you do has to have some kind of cost.
Right.
If you can't if you improve your position somewhere, you're also probably degrading it somewhere else.
Right.
And then within that player position, you have that tension of how far you're going to push it this way or that way. If you look at something like my table battles games, you know, as you roll and assign those dice and create these big attacks, your dice, you have fewer dice and they get a lot less flexible. There's a lot less you can do with them when you have only 2 dice you're rolling compared to having 4. And I think that's really key. And when I have a game that's not working, usually it's because there's a move that is improving the position but isn't weakening it as well somewhere else. And that's the thing I need to kind of finesse, is find what the cost is. What am I giving up here in order to do this there? You know, and that I think makes for an exciting game. You know, I hope. I mean, people seem to enjoy them most of the time. Some people they don't. Like game. Here it is. Irish Gauge here, which that is my best-selling game. It's not a Houndsfield title. It's not a war game. It's a train game, and it was republished last year by Capstone Games. And in that game, you have 4 things you can do on your turn. You can auction a share of stock, you can build track, you can upgrade a town to a city, or you can pay dividends. And every one of those things will hurt your position in some way, or help someone else's position, maybe more than it helps yours. And you're trying to find the thing that advances your position as much as you can without helping everyone else as much, but you're stuck. I mean, there isn't a perfect option that's always going to do well for you. And the game's been received very well, but there are folks who like, and these folks are not war gamers, they're Euro gamers, who they cannot stand the idea of the thing I do helps someone else. And they cannot stand the idea of the thing I do hurts me. It boggles their mind. And I think really that's the key thing that attracts me to game design. That's something that I do in my games, because that's for me that's exciting and interesting. Having something I can do that just makes me win and doesn't have a cost. What am I doing? Why am I playing it?
Right. Well, and so that's interesting, because your games tend to make you deal with the circumstances you're given, and it's not always, it's never a good hand, and it's never a good hand, or it's never a great set of circumstances, as the case may be. So your recent, I was just going to try and pull it up, your recent blog post about I think one of the guys was saying, well, with your games, Tom, I just deal with the hand, I deal with the circumstances I'm given. So I think that's instructive. If folks are looking at your titles, they kind of need to know that, hey, if the Tom and Mary title, you're going to be making hard choices every turn, and there's never, it's kind of like the Brian Train does it as well with his titles. There's never enough resources to go around to do all the things you need to do in his coin-based systems. So it's good stuff.
Yeah, I like it, and I think it works in a historical context. Because the thing about looking at an historical period or historical conflict is that no one has all the resources they want, and no one has a move that doesn't have some kind of cost.
Right.
There's always something that you're giving up in order to do anything. And you're basically just trying to deal with history as it comes at you, as you're living it in the moment. So I think reflecting that in the game mechanically, that's probably what creates more immersion than even anything else is trying to replicate not the exact decisions, because obviously, Abraham Lincoln does not have a hand of ops cards. right? Which ops cards do I play? But replicating the kind of feel and headspace of the thing,
Right.
I think is tremendously important.
Right. And I think in your blog post, you mentioned that, we all need to have the barbells on our arms and legs to
Yes.
unbalance this and make it difficult. And I think that's what we're talking about here, is that tension, which generates mood and affect in a game, whether it's a war game or a Euro or a cooperative or whatever the case may be. If it's just simply, and I'll use, I don't know that Empire of the Sun does it as well because I haven't played it very much, but I feel like with Empire of the Sun or Hannibal versus Carthage, right? Hannibal, you can just play ops or play the event, and there doesn't seem to really be too much difference one way or the other because it's across a more turns and there are more cards in your hand, so I don't get the stress level for making a choice. It's like, oh, okay, well, I want to go do this, so I'm going to play a 3-op card because 3 ops is better than 2 ops, and I don't care about the event. I'll make it up later in some way, shape, or form. Whereas with yours, most of yours, it's like, what the hell am I going to do next? And what's the consequence I can see, and what's the unintended consequence that I haven't worked out yet through multiple plays.
Thank you. I think part of it too is my games are pretty short.
Yes.
They don't take very long to play. So if you screw something up, you find out pretty quick. There's an immediate feedback there, and I think that creates more tension, and it also makes the games easier to table. Because someone like Westphalia, coming back to that, there are games that are 6-player only games, right? That are out there, 6 or 7 player only. Diplomacy is really only for 7 players. Here I Stand, I think, is 6 players, and they're very long.
Yes.
And you really need to set aside a day to play them. So part of doing Westphalia, like we're doing this game, is actually for 6 players only. We're not pretending it can scale the way some other games might pretend they can scale, but you really just want to play them at the maximum player count. We needed it to be short. We needed to be a 2-hour game because otherwise it's just going to limit the market too much for it, right? And with a 2-hour game, your choices are going to matter a lot sooner and have a lot more repercussions because you have so few choices to number of decisions to make. Like, you have this limited time and this limited number of decisions. You got to work with them and make them count. Whereas if the game was twice as long and twice as many turns, you could deal with it a little more, and that particular decision isn't as important.
Right. There's a recovery option, but there's also, with the types of bonus and penalties that you apply to every decision that's made, that would be mentally taxing as well, I think, if it was a longer game, right?
Oh yeah,
I've seen the Here I Stand guys play 6-7 hours and still not get finished, and then come back the next day and try and get it done. I don't know that I have the mental fortitude to dig in that deep on a game, particularly a game with that level of detail and rule book and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Now, there's something to be said for those games. Those people who play them, they get very immersed in them. I remember talking online with Wendell, forgot his last name, the World in Flames guy.
Yes,
he loves World in Flames.
Yes,
and the appeal of World in Flames, is this epic experience, and you get more and more invested in it every hour that you play it. And I get that. I don't want to do that, but that time also creates that emotional investment and that emotional resonance.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something to be said for longer games. I just, I can't test them because we have a cat, and I can get, we have a table that's a certain size,
right?
And so our games are a certain size and a certain length of time, because otherwise I won't be able to play it on the table, and the cat will knock stuff over. So I have a limited window in which we can do things. So
no one. No. So this is news. This is breaking news. No one knew that Hollandspiel Games was business model was built around cat interference.
To a surprising degree, our business model is built around cat interference. That's it's anticipating that. One day I'll get a bigger table and we can have bigger maps. But right now, I'll get some kind of thing to protect the map. But right now we're in that situation where, that's going to be that's always been kind of our guiding thing there. Most of our games, some of our games take 3-4 hours. I don't think we have anything that takes longer than that.
Right. Yeah. Westphalia played very quickly. I was very surprised. And we had a couple of delays because one chap had to duck off to escort his wife to a hotel room and stuff like that. She just arrived. And there was a lot of rancor over that because, well, we can't play unless you're at the table. And the guy, this older gentleman just said, look, tell you what, you make all the choices for me. And to the French player. And he was on his battle sign, I guess, and I forget what country he was playing. But there was a lot of arm waving and drama about that. But otherwise, we were done in 2 hours and 40 minutes or thereabouts. So it was a pretty quick play. Yeah. So sorry, I cut you off there, but you were talking about.
No, that's fine. But yeah, so we tend to go with shorter, smaller games because we have a short, small furry person. So
that's great. Well, look, I know that you and I booked this time to be an hour, but so I'm happy to use the last 10 or 15 minutes or so just to kind of, if you would like to share a little bit about what's upcoming from you, and maybe we can just chat a little bit about that, and then we can, if folks have questions they want to ask, we can do that. I see lots of comments here. I don't know if you can see the comments, but
I can't. No.
You guys
maybe.
Top right hand side.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of comments.
Yeah, it's mainly sort of commentary. There's not a lot of questions going on here.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're pretty good there. But so in terms of upcoming, so we know that down the track there's a Vietnam search rescue game.
Yeah,
coming.
that might be next year or the year after. Yeah.
Okay. Two Roman games coming out.
Yeah. So we just released At All Costs by Tim Taylor.
Right.
And that's the game we actually signed back in 2017. So it's really nice to finally get that out in the world. That's the biggest one we've done in a while.
Mm-hmm.
And we're looking forward to getting back to doing some smaller games. We have some on the docket. The problem right now, there's this virus thing going on.
What's with that, right?
Yeah. And basically, we have 3 vendors we work with. We have our printer, Blue Panther, does pretty much everything except for the wood bits, which are done in Germany, and the cards, which are done by another vendor in the U.S. Our German partner can't make wood bits right now. They're on lockdown. The cards printer can't print cards right now. They're on lockdown. So we have a limited supply of wood bits we have left, and our next 3 or 4 games will have cards that we can't have printed right now. So we're trying to catch up and get stuff ready for when we can release stuff, and we'll kind of play it by ear and be more flexible as to when the schedule is. But games we have planned for this year anyway. There's Streets of Shadows that is designed by Roger Mason and Joseph Miranda. This is occupied Paris, World War II. You are not resistance fighters and you are not collaborators. You're a little bit of both. You're trying to play the two sides against each other for political and economic advantage. So it's a very interesting perspective on that time and that period. And it's a 3 to 5 player game. It takes about 2 hours. And one of the cool bits about it is that at the end of the game, either Paris will be liberated or the Allies will bypass Paris. And you're going to have some input on that as a whole, as a group. The butterfly effects of what you do are going to determine which outcome happens. And if the Allies liberate Paris, then the people who have more loyal, you get points for loyalty to the resistance and negative points for loyalty to the Gestapo. And then if the Paris is not liberated, it's the reverse. So you have different players with different things in their hand, and different actions they've taken might have different incentives to help or hinder. And so that's a really interesting game, and we're really excited to be getting that one.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating.
The game after that we have planned is Dinosaur Table Battles, which is the game Mary is very
it may
excited
be
about.
Someone's hot in that room there with you. Yeah.
And so I'm excited about that one too, because it seems like people are interested in it. Not just people who like table battles, but even a broader audience.
Right.
The trick is that, like a lot of my games, you have these tough decisions, and you have in table battles particularly, you have this thing where if I attack you and you can react to me in some way, you must react, and if you do react, you can't attack on your turn. And I don't know how much the broader audience is going to be there for that. It's what makes the game work, but there are people who really hate that in table battles, and like I'm trying to fix it, and it's like that's the whole point of the game. What are you doing? So we'll see how that goes. I mentioned Stilicho and Aurelian. We have White Eagle Defiant, which is the sequel to Brave Little Belgium, but in Poland, 1939. We have a game called The Field of the Cloth of Gold, which is being released with the 500th anniversary of The Field of the Cloth of Gold, the meeting between Henry VIII and the French guy, whose name I should remember. I feel really bad about this. And that's more of a Euro game. More of a 90s style Euro game where it's actually really mean, and not any of these good feeling Euro games they got going on that right now. And so we are planning on release that like June 20th, when the 500th anniversary of the event happens. Right. We have the first game in our American Civil War operational series from John Tyson. Is called Our God Was My Shield. That's Jackson's Valley campaign. We have a new game from John Gurkowski, which is called Empire at Sunrise. That's Japan and World War I, Pacific Theater, World War I, which doesn't get gamed very often. We have another District Commander game from Brian Train. That's going to be Kandahar, I believe. And we have Horse and Musket Volume 4, which is the American Revolution and French Revolution, battles from that period.
I'm going to have to get that one. And the Kandahar one, is that a reprint or is that a new title? Do you know?
Sorry, which one?
Kandahar.
No, that's a new title. The District Commander series is they're new titles with a new system. He has covered a lot of these topics before in games that are somewhat similar. But the District Commander system is a different approach to that.
Yeah, I like Maracas, by the way. It's pretty cool. I didn't get to finish, but I noted down all my locations. I intend to set that back up. Lots of theme and narrative coming out of that. It's good stuff, and hard to kind of
and then the last two games. So those are all games we can plan for this year. And there are two more games on top of that. One is The Vote, which is kind of a re-implementation of the This Guilty Land system, with some new bells and whistles, covering women's suffrage in America. And we're doing that for the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. And then I have a game called Dual Gauge, which is a game about trains. Train games sell a lot more than war games do.
Yeah,
people like trains.
You gotta make the money as well, right? There's nothing wrong with that. So there is one question here, and that's an amazing. So that'll put you up well over 65 games out since inception.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and we'll have our Tale Battles expansion on top of that, which will be the Grand Alliance.
Dinosaur expansion.
No, Mary?
No. It's got to be a dinosaur expansion.
Okay, that might be next year. The expansion. We still got to get Dinosaur Tale Battles out there before we expand it. but there'll be
You
a
haven't done expansions for it yet. You
there'll,
should.
there'll be a Grand Alliance expansion.
We're having a management meeting right now.
Yeah.
production meeting. There was one question here that is interesting. Is that the dynasty, depending on where you come from, the license is reverting back to the Berg estate. So is that still available for sale?
Yes, we're still selling it until our license expires.
Which is when?
June or July. So we're still selling it. Right now, we have a limited supply of bits and cards. Actually, we need to find out exactly how many cards we have left. And we can't print any cards. So once those sell, we're going to be stuck until our card printer is back up and running again. And hopefully that's going to be well before the license expires and we can do a final sale with that.
Right. Okay, cool. Yeah, I may have to, although it's a multiplayer game, I may have to get a copy of that because I was always curious about that topic. And of course, here's one for Mary. Not nearly as many games covering the wars of the dinosaurs. So,
that's true. That's very true.
So,
if Mary had her way, everything I do would be dinosaurs. Everything we do would be dinosaurs. She's nodding her head.
And it looks like, do you know Gilbert Collins? Have you seen his YouTube channel?
I remember watching his. Yeah, I haven't done it in a while, but I remember watching his videos fairly often. It looks amazing.
Looks like he's looking for a publisher as well.
Yeah.
So,
the problem we have right now is that, as you can tell, we have a lot of games in our pipeline, and that's just the stuff from this year I told you about. We basically have next year planned out as well, and so what we're trying to do is get our pile of games down, so we can be a bit more flexible again. Because when we started, we were pretty flexible, and when we signed on a game, we could release it 6 to 12 months later, and now we're in a period where we're releasing games that we signed 2-3 years ago, and that's not where we want to be. So at the moment, we're not really accepting any submissions or looking for any new titles, just because we don't want people to be stuck in that pipeline where they're waiting years for the game to come out. I was on the receiving end of that a couple times, and I don't like it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, excellent. Thanks for chatting with me today, and I hope everyone enjoyed the conversation. What folks do need to know is that you and Mary have a very entertaining and succinct, sometimes, podcast.
Yeah.
So they should check that out on SoundCloud as well. So I wanted to give that a shout out. And obviously everyone knows that you're at hollandspiel.com. But thanks for taking the time to talk about kind of an esoteric topic as it relates to wargaming. But I think it matters. So
yeah,
thank you
absolutely.
So we'll leave it there and I'll wrap it up. And I appreciate everybody joining in.